I never thought turning 55 would find me sobbing in a hospital parking lot, clutching discharge papers with no one to drive me home. Yet, there I was, my incision still burning beneath layers of gauze, staring at a screen full of text. Messages that all essentially said the same thing. Sorry, can't make it. My daughter Elise was swamped with client meetings. My son Trevor had the kids all weekend. My sister Diane was dealing with her own issues right now. And my closest friend Beth was out of town until Tuesday. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I sat in that cold car for nearly 40 minutes, waiting for the pain medication to kick in enough that I could trust myself to drive the 15 miles back to my empty house. The surgeon had been clear. You'll need someone to stay with you for at least the first 48 hours. When I'd assured him that wouldn't be a problem, I had genuinely believed it. After all, I'd been there for all of them. Every crisis, every celebration, every mundane Tuesday when they just needed someone to listen. How quickly we discover the true architecture of our relationships when we're the ones in need. The diagnosis had come just 3 weeks earlier. A routine mammogram followed by, "We need you to come back for additional imaging." Then the biopsy. Then the words no one wants to hear. It's cancer, but we caught it early. The lumpectomy was scheduled quickly, a blessing that left little time to worry, but also little time to arrange the aftermath. "Mom, of course we'll help," Elise had said, her voice warm with concern during our weekly Sunday call. "Just let us know when." "Count on me," Trevor had promised, squeezing my shoulder at our last family dinner. "I can rearrange my schedule." But as the surgery date approached, the backpedaling began. Little excuses at first, then bigger ones. "It's just day surgery, Mom," Elise had rationalized the night before. "You've always bounced back quickly from everything." I had bounced back quickly from everything, including their father walking. Out 15 years ago, leaving me with a mortgage, 2 teenagers, and a teaching job that barely covered the bills. I'd worked extra shifts tutoring after school, sold homemade jewelry at weekend craft fairs, and somehow kept us all afloat without ever missing a soccer game or dance recital. I'd helped Elise with the down payment on her first condo and covered Trevor's graduate school application fees when his own funds fell short. I had been their safety net for so long that perhaps they'd forgotten safety nets aren't mystical entities that exist without effort or cost. They're made of people who choose to be there. The drive home from the hospital was a blur of pain and careful concentration. I parked crookedly in my driveway, fumbled with my house keys, and finally collapsed onto my living room couch, too exhausted to make it to the bedroom. The doctor's instructions echoed in my mind. Don't lift anything over 5 pounds. Keep the incision dry. Watch for signs of infection. How was I supposed to change my bandages? How would I prepare food? Who would pick up my prescriptions when the hospital-provided doses ran out? My phone buzzed on the coffee table. Elise. "Mom, how'd it go?" I stared at the screen for a moment, considering my options. I could tell her the truth, that I was alone and terrified and in pain. Or I could do what I'd always done, protect her from my struggles. "Everything went fine," I replied, choosing the familiar path of least resistance. "Just resting now." "Great. Let me know if you need anything. I could maybe swing by tomorrow afternoon for a quick visit." Tomorrow afternoon. Nearly 24 hours away, and a quick visit wouldn't address the fact that I wasn't supposed to be alone overnight after anesthesia. "That would be nice," I typed, then set the phone down. I must have dozed off because I woke to darkness and disorientation. The pain medication had worn off, and my chest felt like it was on fire. I needed water, my evening dose of antibiotics, and fresh ice for the surgical site. Each task seemed monumentally difficult as I shuffled around my empty house. As I stood in my kitchen, struggling to open the child-proof cap on my prescription bottle with trembling hands, something shifted, inside me. A lifetime of accommodating others, of understanding their limitations and excusing their absences while holding myself to impossible standards, suddenly felt unbearable. I'd raised my children to be independent, yes, but had I also inadvertently taught them that my needs would always be secondary? Had my self-sufficiency become a trap of my own making? The next morning, I woke to a text from Trevor. Checking in. How are you feeling? The kids have been asking about Grandma. I stared at the message, a complex mixture of love and resentment churning inside me. I loved my son and my grandchildren fiercely, but I also registered the subtle abdication in his words, checking in via text rather than in person, mentioning the children as though their concern absolved him of his absence. Still recovering, I replied. Would have been nice to have some help yesterday. His response came quickly. I know, Mom. I'm really sorry. This weekend has been crazy. I can stop by with the kids later this week. Later this week? When the most critical recovery period would be over. When I would have already struggled through the hardest parts alone. Don't worry about it, I typed back. I'm managing. And I was managing, in the barest technical sense of the word. I'd rigged up a system using tongs from the kitchen to retrieve items I couldn't reach. I'd ordered groceries delivered and left specific instructions about leaving everything on my porch table instead of the ground, so I wouldn't have to bend. I'd called in a favor from my elderly neighbor, Mr. Peterson, who had picked up my additional prescriptions from the pharmacy despite his own arthritis and mobility issues. I spent those first 3 days of recovery in a fog of pain medication, Netflix marathons, and fitful sleep. Friends from my book club texted occasionally. My sister called once to say she was thinking of me. But no one came. No one stayed. The surgeon had been right. I shouldn't have been alone. But I was. On the 4th day, when I was finally able to shower, carefully with plastic wrap taped over my bandages, I caught sight of myself in the bathroom mirror. Pale, with dark circles under my eyes, I looked every one of my 55 years plus about a decade more. But there was something else in my reflection that I hadn't noticed before, a steeliness in my gaze that hadn't been there before the surgery. I dried off slowly, wincing as I carefully patted around my incision site and made myself a promise. This was the last time I would prioritize people who wouldn't do the same for me. The last time I would understand and forgive without requiring any accountability. The last time I would be taken for granted. It would take another week before I could drive safely, so I used that time to reflect and plan. I journaled extensively, documenting not just the physical pain of my recovery, but the emotional wounds that had been reopened and deepened by my children's absence when I needed them most. I made lists of all the times I'd dropped everything, to be there for them, alongside the increasingly rare occasions when they'd done the same for me. The imbalance was stark and undeniable when laid out in black and white. The truth was, I'd become a resource, not a person with needs and vulnerabilities of my own. I had no one to blame but myself for allowing it to happen, but that didn't make it hurt any less. When my post-operative checkup came around, Mr. Peterson insisted on driving me. At 82, he drove like someone navigating through molasses, but he got me there safely and waited patiently in the reception area. Everything is healing well, the doctor assured me after examining the incision. The pathology came back clear on the margins, which means we got it all. You'll need radiation therapy as a precaution, but that won't start for another few weeks. I nodded, absorbing the good news. And the restrictions? When can I get back to normal activities? You can gradually increase your activity level, but no heavy lifting for another 2 weeks at least. How's your support system at home? Is someone helping you? I thought about lying, then decided against it. Not really. My children have busy lives. The doctor frowned slightly. At your age, recovery takes longer. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. You need to be careful not to overdo it, especially with radiation coming up. At my age, the words stung, though they were simply factual. I wasn't 30 anymore, bouncing back from challenges with seemingly limitless reserves of energy. Cancer. And surgery had taken a toll, and my body needed proper time to heal. Mr. Peterson and I stopped for lunch at a small cafe on the way home. He insisted on treating me, waving away my protests with a weathered hand. "When my Martha was alive," he said, carefully cutting his sandwich into manageable quarters, "we looked out for each other. That's what people are supposed to do." He looked up, his pale blue eyes holding steady on mine. "Your children should have been there for you." The simple validation nearly undid me. I blinked back tears and focused on my soup. "They're busy," I said automatically, the familiar excuse rising to my lips. "They have their own lives." "So do you," he replied firmly. "And right now, your life includes cancer." I sat with that truth, letting it settle into my bones. My life included cancer. Not just the disease itself, but all its implications: vulnerability, mortality, fear, and a desperate need for human connection during a frightening time. That evening, I received a group text from Elise. "Big news, everyone. I've been offered the junior partner position at the firm. Celebration dinner this Saturday at Costello's. Dad's flying in from Phoenix. RSVP. Yes, because I'm not taking no." For an answer. Congratulatory responses flooded in immediately. Trevor, my sister, even some extended family members I rarely heard from. The notification sounds on my phone pinged repeatedly as everyone expressed their excitement and confirmed their attendance. I stared at the message, feeling a complicated swirl of emotions. Pride in my daughter's achievement, certainly. She had worked incredibly hard for this promotion. But also a profound hurt that she had seemingly forgotten I was barely 2 weeks post-surgery. Costello's was an upscale Italian restaurant with notoriously uncomfortable wooden chairs and flights of stairs to reach the main dining room. The thought of sitting upright for a 3-hour dinner so soon after my procedure made my incision throb in anticipation. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I set my phone aside and made myself a cup of tea, giving myself permission to prioritize my feelings for once. When I finally picked up my phone again, there was a direct message from Elise. "Mom, are you going to respond? This is kind of a big deal for me." The subtle guilt trip wasn't lost on me. Of course it was a big deal. Of course I wanted to celebrate her success. But my body was telling me it wasn't ready for that kind of outing. "Congratulations, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you," I wrote back. "But I'm afraid I'll have to miss the dinner. I'm still recovering, and not up for a restaurant outing yet. Could we do something quiet at my place next week instead?" Her response was nearly instantaneous. "Mom, come on. It's been 2 weeks already. Dad is flying all the way from Arizona. Can't you just push through for one night? This promotion is everything I've been working for." Push through. As if my physical limitations were simply a matter of insufficient effort or willpower. As if my surgery were a minor inconvenience rather than a life-altering event. I took a deep breath and typed my response carefully. "I'm sorry, Elise, but I can't. My doctor has advised against this kind of activity so soon after surgery. I'd love to celebrate with you another way." She didn't respond for over an hour. When she did, her message was curt. "Fine. I guess I'll see you when I see you then." The old me would have immediately backtracked. I would have promised to be there, regardless of the physical cost. I would have pushed through and spent the following days in pain and exhaustion, all to avoid the discomfort of disappointing my daughter. But the woman who had sobbed alone in a hospital parking lot was gone. In her place was someone who understood, finally and completely, that her health and well-being mattered too. "I love you," I texted back, "and I'm incredibly proud of you. I hope the dinner is wonderful." Then I set my phone to Do Not Disturb and went to bed early. The next morning, I had a voice message from Trevor. "Mom, what's this about you not coming to Elise's dinner? She's really upset. Can't you just show up for an hour or so? You know how she gets when she feels like she's not being supported." I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar weight of expected sacrifice settling onto my shoulders. Then I straightened my spine and called my son back. "Trevor," I said when he answered, "I'm going to ask you something, and I'd like you to really think before you respond. Where were you the day of my cancer surgery?" The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I wondered if we'd been disconnected. "I had the kids," he finally said, his voice quieter. "Melissa was at that conference in Chicago. Yes, you had the kids. The same 3 children you've had every day since they were born. And because of that, you couldn't drive your mother home from cancer surgery or check on her even once during the most critical days of her recovery." "Mom, that's not fair. You know how challenging the kids can be, especially all together." "Life isn't fair, Trevor," I interrupted, surprising myself with my firmness. "Cancer isn't fair. Having surgery alone isn't fair. But what's really not fair is that I have always been there for you and your sister, dropping everything when you needed me. And the one time, I truly needed you both, you were too busy." Another lengthy silence. I don't know what to say," he finally responded. "We messed up. I know we did." "Yes, you did," I agreed, not unkindly. "And now I need you to hear me when I say I physically cannot sit in a restaurant for hours right now. My body is still healing from being cut open to remove cancer. This isn't about Elise's promotion or my support for her. This is about my actual, physical limitations at this moment." "I understand," he said quietly. "I'll talk to Elise." After we hung up, I felt lighter than I had in weeks, despite the continuing discomfort of my healing incision. Standing up for myself, clearly articulating my needs without apologizing for having them. It was like flexing a muscle I'd allowed to atrophy over decades of putting others first. The Saturday of Elise's celebration dinner came and went. I received a few photos from my sister, Elise beaming in a new dress, champagne glasses raised in toast, my ex-husband looking tanned and prosperous with his arm around our daughter. I sent a congratulatory text and spent the evening reading a novel I'd been meaning to get to for months, perfectly content in my solitude. The following week brought my first radiation planning appointment. I'd arranged for a hospital transport, service to take me, unwilling to impose on Mr. Peterson again. As I was about to leave, Trevor appeared on my doorstep, car keys in hand. "I thought you might want a ride," he said, his expression somewhere between sheepish and determined. I looked at him for a long moment, taking in the dark circles under his eyes and the slight slump of his shoulders that suggested he hadn't been sleeping well. "That would be nice," I finally said, canceling the transport with a quick call. In nigh. The car. Trevor kept glancing at me as if wanting to say something but not knowing how to begin. Finally, as we waited at a red light, he blurted out, "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about always being there for us, and us not being there for you. And you're right, Mom. We've taken you for granted." The light turned green, and he focused on driving again. "After Dad left," he continued, "you somehow managed everything. You never complained, never faltered. You were like this force of nature. I think maybe we started believing you were invincible." "I'm not," I said softly. "I'm just a person who did what needed to be done." "I know that now." He nodded. "And I'm sorry it took something like cancer for me to see it." The radiation planning appointment was lengthy and somewhat uncomfortable, involving multiple scans and tiny permanent marker tattoos to guide the radiation beams. Trevor waited patiently, working on his laptop in the hospital cafe, and was ready with a gentle arm of support when I emerged, tired and sore. "Elise feels terrible, you know," he said as he drove me home. She cried after the dinner, said it didn't feel right celebrating without you there. I looked out the window at the passing scenery, considering this. She hasn't called or visited. You know Elise. She's not good with guilt, makes her defensive. I did know that about my daughter. Her drive and ambition were matched only by her difficulty in admitting when she was wrong, like her father in that way. I'm not looking for apologies, Trevor. I just want to be treated like a person whose needs matter too. He nodded slowly. That's fair. More than fair. When we arrived at my house, he surprised me by coming inside and heading straight to my kitchen. I brought some groceries, he explained, pulling items from a bag I hadn't noticed him carrying. And I made a bunch of meals that you can just heat up. He opened my freezer to reveal neatly stacked containers, each labeled with contents and heating instructions. The unexpected thoughtfulness brought tears to my eyes. Thank you, I said, meaning it deeply. It's literally the least I could do, he replied, his voice rough with emotion. Melissa helped. She feels awful, too, about not being more present during all this. I leaned against the counter, suddenly tired. It's been a wake-up call for all of us, I think. Trevor nodded, then hesitated before asking, would it be okay if I brought the kids by this weekend? They miss their grandma, and I'd like them to understand that family means showing up for each other, not just when it's convenient. I'd like that, I said, smiling genuinely for what felt like the first time in weeks. The radiation treatments began the following Monday, the first of 30 daily sessions that would become my new normal for the next 6 weeks. The procedure itself was quick and painless, but the cumulative effects would eventually leave me fatigued and my skin burned and sensitive. Trevor drove me to the first treatment. My sister Diane took me to the second, full of apologies and explanations about her own life stresses that had kept her away. By the third session, Elise finally reached out, calling rather than texting. I was wondering if I could take you to radiation tomorrow, she said, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. And maybe we could get lunch after, if you're feeling up to it? I'd like that, I replied, deciding to make it easy for her. When she picked me up the next day, the atmosphere between us was strained at first. She filled the silence with chatter about her new position, the projects she was overseeing, the office politics she was navigating. I listened and nodded, seeing clearly how she used work as a shield against more vulnerable conversations, another trait she shared with her father. After my treatment, we went to a quiet cafe where she finally ran out of workplace anecdotes. She fidgeted with her napkin, tearing small pieces from the corner. Mom, she began, then stopped, taking a deep breath. I really screwed up with the surgery, with not being there, and then with the dinner. I was so caught up in my own stuff that I didn't stop to think about what you were going through. No, you didn't, I agreed, neither accusatory nor absolving. I've always relied on you being the strong one, she continued, the one who has everything under control. Even the strong ones need support sometimes, Elise. She nodded, still not meeting my eyes. I know that. Intellectually, I know that. But seeing you vulnerable, it scared me. If you could get cancer, if you could need help instead of always providing it. She finally looked up. It means you're human and mortal, and I'm not ready for that reality. The honesty struck me with unexpected force. Of course, my illness had confronted my children with my mortality in a way they'd never had to face before. Their absence wasn't just selfishness. It was also fear. I'm not going anywhere just yet, I said gently. But yes, I'm human. And sometimes I need my daughter. Elise reached across the table and took my hand, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I'm here now. Better late than never, right? Better late than never, I agreed, squeezing her fingers. Over the following weeks, as radiation fatigue began to set in, and the skin on my chest grew increasingly tender and irritated, my support system solidified in ways I wouldn't have thought possible before my surgery. Trevor brought the kids regularly, making sure they understood the need to be gentle with Grandma, but not treating me like I was made of glass. Elise came by several times a week, sometimes just to sit quietly with me when I was too tired for conversation. Even my sister Diane stepped up, coordinating a meal train among my friends and neighbors. It wasn't perfect. There were still days when appointments had to be rescheduled or visits canceled due to work emergencies or childcare issues. But there was a fundamental change in how my needs were being prioritized. Not always first, which would have been unrealistic, but no longer dead last by default. I was just beginning to adjust to this new family dynamic when everything shifted again. It was a Tuesday evening, about halfway through my radiation treatment schedule. I was resting on the couch, applying special cream to my increasingly irritated skin when my phone rang. It was Elise, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Mom, I need help. I've been suspended from the firm pending an investigation. They're saying I mishandled client funds, but I didn't. I swear I didn't. But they've frozen everything, even my personal accounts as a precaution. I can't access any of my money, and rent is due next week, and I don't know what to do." I listened as she poured out the details. A senior partner who had always disliked her, suspicious timing right after her promotion, implications that could end her legal career before it truly began. "How much do you need?" I asked when she finally paused for breath. "$4,000 would cover rent and basic expenses until this gets sorted out," she replied, the relief in her voice palpable. "I'll pay you back as soon as my accounts are unfrozen, I promise." $4,000. Not an insignificant sum for me, especially with medical bills starting to arrive despite my insurance. It would mean dipping into my emergency fund, the same fund I'd been carefully maintaining since her father left. "I'll think about it," I said carefully. Her sharp intake of breath carried clearly through the phone. "Think about it? Mom, I'm in a crisis here. I could lose my apartment." "I understand that," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "And I need to review my finances before I can commit to such a large amount. I'll let you know tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" "But Tomorrow, Elise," I repeated firmly. "We'll talk then." After we hung up, I sat in the dim light of my living room, feeling the weight of this pivotal moment. The old me would have immediately transferred the money, regardless of my own financial situation or the impact on my security. The old me would have considered any hesitation a failure of maternal love. But the new me, the me who had faced cancer alone in a hospital parking lot, recognized something important. Love didn't mean martyrdom. Support didn't mean sacrifice without boundaries, and patterns didn't change unless you changed them, deliberately and consciously. I spent that evening reviewing my finances with clear eyes. Between my ongoing medical expenses, the reduced income from taking time off work during treatment, and the standard bills of everyday life, $4,000 would leave me dangerously close to financial instability. Not impossible, but certainly imprudent. The next morning, I called Elise. "I've thought about your situation," I began, "and I can offer you $1,500 now. Not as a gift, but as a loan with a written agreement about repayment terms." "$1,500? She echoed, disbelief coloring her voice. "That won't even cover my rent." "It's what I can safely manage right now," I replied evenly. "My medical bills are substantial, Elise, and my income is reduced while I'm undergoing treatment." "But this is an emergency," she protested. "Can't you take it from your retirement fund or something?" "Could you stay with Trevor temporarily?" I suggested instead. "Or speak to your landlord about a payment plan until this is resolved." "I can't believe this," she said, her voice rising. "The one time I need significant help from you." "The one time?" I interrupted, a calm clarity washing over me. "Elise, I put you through college. I helped with the down payment on your condo. I was there for every crisis, every accomplishment, every ordinary Tuesday for your entire life. And 3 weeks ago, when I was alone and scared after cancer surgery, you were too busy to drive me home from the hospital. The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. That's different, she finally said, her voice smaller. Yes, it is, I agreed. Because my need was physical presence, which costs nothing but time and care. Yours is financial, which comes at significant cost to my security. So this is, what? Punishment? No, sweetheart. It's a boundary. I can help you with 1,500, which is substantial but won't compromise my own stability. The rest you'll need to figure out another way, just like I had to figure out my own way through cancer surgery recovery. Another long pause. I'll take the 1,500, she finally said, her voice tight. But I want you to know, I think this is really unfair. I understand you feel that way, I replied. The money will be in your account this afternoon. After we hung up, I felt a mix of emotions. Guilt, certainly, at not being able to swoop in and solve my daughter's problems completely, but also a steadfast certainty that I was doing the right thing. Not just for me, but ultimately for her as well. That evening, Trevor called. Elise told me what happened, he began without preamble. She's pretty upset. I imagine she is, I replied. Financial stress is frightening. She says you're punishing her for not being there after your surgery. I sighed, settling more comfortably on my couch. That's not what's happening, Trevor. I'm offering what help I can without compromising my own security. There's a difference. He was quiet for a moment. You know, when Elise called me, my first thought was that you'd give her whatever she needed without question. That's just what you've always done. Yes, I agreed. It is what I've always done. And it created a pattern where my needs were considered optional while everyone else's were treated as mandatory. I never thought of it that way, he admitted. Neither did I until recently. For what it's worth, he added after a moment, I think you're right. It's just an adjustment for all of us. The following weeks brought significant developments. Elise, forced to problem solve beyond simply turning to me, discovered that her firm's ethical committee had evidence exonerating her. The senior partner who had accused her was placed on leave pending his own investigation, and her accounts were unfrozen within days. She appeared on my doorstep the evening after the resolution, holding a folder and wearing an expression of chastened reflection. I brought a check for the 1,500, she said as I invited her in, plus a little extra for interest. I accepted the folder, which contained not just the check, but also a handwritten letter. What's this? Something I should have said in person a long time ago, she replied. But I thought writing it down might help me get it right. I set the folder aside. Would you like some tea? She nodded, following me to the kitchen where we moved in companionable silence, preparing mugs and waiting for the kettle to boil. There was a new carefulness in how she watched me, noting when I winced slightly from radiation tenderness, stepping in to reach for items on higher shelves without being asked. How are you feeling? She asked as we settled at my kitchen table. Truthfully, tired, I admitted. The radiation fatigue is cumulative. Each day gets a little harder. She nodded, absorbing this rather than immediately offering solutions or changing the subject as she might have before. I've been thinking a lot, she began, wrapping her hands around her mug, about patterns and expectations, about taking you for granted. And? I prompted gently when she paused. And I've been awful, she said bluntly. Not just with the surgery, but for years. You've been this. Constant, unwavering support. And I just assumed you always would be on my terms, whenever I needed you. We all fell into that pattern, I acknowledged, me included. but I'm the adult child who should have seen you as a whole person with needs and limitations. She met my eyes directly. I'm sorry, Mom. Truly. I know, I said simply. And I forgive you. We talked for hours that night, really talked, about expectations and boundaries, about her fear of losing me, about my journey toward valuing myself enough to establish healthier patterns. As she was leaving, she paused at the door. The money thing. That was a wake-up call. For both of us, I replied. I'm glad you said no, she admitted. Not at the time, obviously, but now. It showed me you truly are changing the dynamics between us. And that's good, even when it's uncomfortable. I hugged her, careful of my tender skin. When I needed help after surgery, you were too busy. When you needed money, I suddenly was too. But the difference is, I really was too financially constrained to help fully, while you simply chose not to prioritize me. She winced but nodded. I deserved that. It's not about deserving, I corrected gently. It's about awareness. We're both more aware now. In the months that followed, as I completed radiation and began the long process of reclaiming my energy and strength, our family dynamics continued to evolve. There were setbacks, moments when old patterns threatened to reassert themselves, when expectations clashed with new boundaries. But there was also growth, a gradually deepening understanding that love demands mutuality to remain healthy. My cancer experience, difficult as it was, had revealed the true architecture of my most important relationships, and then given me the opportunity to redesign that architecture with intention rather than habit. I was no longer the woman who would sacrifice her own well-being to avoid disappointing others. I was no longer the safety net that existed without acknowledgement or reciprocity. I was, instead, simply myself, a woman of 55 with needs and boundaries and the courage to express both. A woman who could offer love and support without self-erasure. A woman who had faced mortality and emerged with a clearer vision of how to live. On the 1-year anniversary of my diagnosis, my children threw me a small celebration dinner at my home, with comfortable seating and frequent rest breaks built into the evening. They'd coordinated everything, from the food to the cleanup, requiring nothing from me but my presence. To Mom, Trevor toasted, raising his glass, who taught us the hard way that showing up matters and that love is something you do, not just something you feel. To Mom, Elise echoed, her eyes meeting mine with newfound understanding, who finally taught us that she matters too. I raised my own glass, looking at these adults I'd raised, these relationships I'd rebuilt, this life I'd reclaimed. To all of us, I amended, and to second chances. 2 months after completing radiation, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, examining my reflection with more honesty than I had in years. The skin on my chest had mostly healed, transitioning from angry red to a softer pink that would eventually fade to white. My hair, which had thinned but never completely fallen out during treatment, was growing back with surprising vigor, though with more silver strands weaving through the brown. I looked tired, certainly. The dark circles under my eyes spoke of countless restless nights and a body still working hard to heal itself. But there was something else there too, a steadiness in my gaze that was new, a quiet confidence that had emerged from the crucible of the past months. The doorbell rang, pulling me from my self-assessment. I straightened my blouse and went to answer, finding Diane on my doorstep with 2 cups of coffee and a paper bag that promised pastries. "Morning check-in," she announced, sweeping past me into the living room. And I come bearing carbohydrates. My sister had been doing these impromptu visits at least twice a week since our confrontation during my treatment. It was a small but consistent way she showed her commitment to our repaired relationship. "Perfect timing," I said, accepting the coffee gratefully. I was just having a moment with my mirror. "And how did that go?" Diane asked, settling onto my couch and opening the pastry bag. "Surprisingly well." I took a sip of the coffee, prepared, exactly as I liked it, with just a dash of cinnamon. "I'm starting to recognize myself again." Diane nodded, understanding the layers in that simple statement. "The new you or the old you?" "Both," I replied after a moment's consideration. "Or maybe neither, just me." We ate our pastries in comfortable silence, a far cry from the strained conversations that had characterized our interactions in the early days after my surgery. Diane had been deeply shaken by my boundaries, not just regarding the help I'd needed, but by my newfound willingness to name the dynamics that had defined our relationship for decades. "I've been thinking," she said finally, brushing crumbs from her lap. "Remember how Mom always used to say that turning 50 was when a woman finally got to know herself?" I smiled at the memory of our mother, gone now for 15 years, but still so present in our conversations. And Dad would always chime in with, "That's because it takes that long for a woman to stop worrying about what everyone else thinks." "They were right," Diane said thoughtfully, "though I think in your case it took cancer to get you there." "Not just cancer," I corrected gently, "but being abandoned in that hospital parking lot certainly accelerated the process." Diane winced but didn't look away as she might have months earlier. "I still can't believe none of us showed up for you that day." "I still can't believe I didn't demand that you did," I countered. "That's on me. I spent so many years pretending I could handle everything alone that when I truly couldn't, I didn't know how to ask properly." "Still, we should have known." I shrugged, neither absolving nor condemning. We all should have known a lot of things. After Diane left, I spent the afternoon preparing for my first day back at work the following Monday. After 6 months of medical leave, returning to my position as head librarian at Oak Ridge Community College felt both exciting and daunting. My colleagues had been supportive throughout my treatment, covering my responsibilities and sending regular care packages. But I wondered how they would respond to the woman I had become. Someone who now said no without apology and prioritized her own well-being alongside others. I was reorganizing my work bag when my phone rang with Trevor's ringtone. "Hey, Mom," he greeted me, the background noise suggesting he was driving. "How are you feeling about Monday?" "Nervous," I admitted, "but ready, I think." "That's great," he said, and I could hear the genuine pleasure in his voice. "Listen, I'm on my way over. The kids made you something for your first day back, and they're insisting I deliver it tonight." "You don't have to." "I want to," he interrupted firmly. "And it's no trouble. I was heading out to pick up dinner anyway, and Melissa's got a handle on homework duty." The ease with which he dismissed my automatic protest made me smile. My son was learning. When Trevor arrived 30 minutes later, he was carrying not only a large, awkwardly wrapped package, but also a bag from my favorite Thai restaurant. "The kids' project and dinner," he explained, setting both on my kitchen counter. I figured, "You might not feel like cooking with all the first-day preparations." The thoughtfulness of the gesture, anticipating my needs without me having to voice them, brought a lump to my throat. "Thank you," I said simply, not hiding my emotion. Trevor nodded, then gestured to the package. "They're pretty proud of this. Worked on it all week." Inside the haphazard wrapping paper was a large handmade book titled Grandma's Superpowers in glitter glue and crayon. Each page featured childish illustrations of me performing various feats. Grandma can find any book in the library without a computer. Grandma knows how to make OEs better. And most poignantly, Grandma fought the cancer monster and won. This is... I traced the words with my fingertips, overwhelmed. "Emma's idea," Trevor said, watching my reaction. "She said you needed to remember how brave you are before going back to work." Out of the mouths of 7-year-olds. "I'll treasure this," I promised, carefully setting the book on my coffee table where I'd see it each morning. Trevor stayed for dinner, and our conversation flowed with a newfound ease. He told me about Melissa's promotion at her accounting firm, about his own challenges managing a team remotely since his company downsized their office space. We talked about the kids' summer plans and his concerns about Emma's reading reluctance. What struck me most was how the conversation balanced. He asked about my health, my concerns about returning to work, my plans for the garden now that I had more energy. Real questions that invited real answers, not perfunctory check-ins that could be satisfied with, "I'm fine." As he was leaving, he paused at the door, seeming to wrestle with something. "What is it?" I prompted. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of his teenage years that it made my heart ache with love. "I like who we are now, Mom. How we talk to each other. How honest it feels." "I like it too," I said softly. "Sometimes I feel guilty that it took almost losing you to cancer for me to see you as a complete person, not just my mother." His voice caught slightly. "But mostly, I'm just grateful we got here, whatever the path." I reached up to cup his cheek, this grown man who would always be my little boy in some corner of my heart. "We got here together," I reminded him. "That's what matters." After he left, I sat with the children's book in my lap, thinking about transformation, how sometimes the most profound changes come not from what happens to us, but from how we choose to respond. Cancer had been the catalyst, yes, but the real metamorphosis had come from the decisions I'd made in its wake. Monday morning arrived with a clarity that belied my internal nervousness. I dressed carefully in a new outfit, a tailored pantsuit, in a deep teal that would have seemed too bold for the old me but felt exactly right for the woman I was becoming. The color complemented my now silver-streaked hair, which I wore loose around my shoulders rather than in the practical bun that had been my professional signature for years. As I gathered my things to leave, I caught sight of the children's book on my coffee table and impulsively slipped it into my work bag. A talisman against doubt, a reminder of why boundaries mattered. The drive to campus was familiar, the routine of it settling some of my nerves. The early September sunshine cast a golden glow over the quad as I walked from the parking lot to the library, nodding at students and faculty who called out welcome backs and well wishes. Inside, the staff had hung a welcome home banner over the circulation desk, and my assistant Margie engulfed me in a careful hug the moment I stepped through the door. "Look at you," she said, stepping back to take me in. "You look amazing." "I look alive," I corrected with a smile, which is pretty amazing in itself. The morning passed in a whirlwind of catch-ups and reorientation. Systems had been updated during my absence, new student workers hired, collection priorities shifted. Through it all, I found myself applying the lessons of my personal transformation to my professional realm, asking direct questions instead of assuming, expressing preferences clearly, delegating without feeling obligated to apologize. By lunchtime, I was exhausted but exhilarated. Margie insisted on treating me to lunch at the campus cafe, and as we settled at a quiet corner table, she studied me with curious eyes. "You're different," she observed, stirring her soup thoughtfully. "And I don't just mean physically." I took a bite of my sandwich, considering how to respond. Margie and I had worked together for over a decade, maintaining a friendly professional relationship without venturing into deeper personal territory. But perhaps that, too, was a pattern ready for reconsideration. "Cancer changes you," I acknowledged, "but not always in the ways people expect." Margie waited, giving me space to continue if I wished to. "I learned some hard truths during my treatment," I went on, surprising myself with my openness. "About my relationships, about how I've allowed myself to be valued, or not valued, by the people closest to me." "That sounds painful," she said, quietly. It was. I looked out the window at students crossing the quad, young people with their lives unfolding before them. But necessary. I spent so many years being whatever everyone needed me to be that I lost sight of my own needs entirely. Margie nodded slowly. I get that. After my divorce, I realized I'd been doing the same thing with Mark, always adjusting myself to fit whatever mood he was in, whatever he wanted that day. This was news to me. In all our years working together, Margie had never mentioned her marriage or its dissolution in anything but the most general terms. How did you change that pattern? I asked, genuinely curious. Therapy, she replied with a small smile. Lots of it. And practicing saying what I actually want instead of what I think will cause the least disruption. She tilted her head, studying me. But you've figured that out on your own, haven't you? Not entirely on my own, I said, thinking of Mr. Peterson's straight-talking support and the hard-won insights from confrontations with my children. But yes, I'm learning. Well, it suits you, Margie declared, raising her water glass in a small toast. To authentic living. To authentic living, I echoed, clinking my glass against hers. The afternoon brought my first challenge in applying this new authenticity to my professional life. Dean Harrington, my direct supervisor and a man known for his heavy-handed management style, stopped by my office unannounced. Helen, he boomed, filling the doorway with his substantial presence. Good to see you back in the saddle. Got a minute? I gestured to the chair across from my desk, noting the thick folder tucked under his arm with some trepidation. Of course. He settled himself with a creak of leather against wood, then dropped the folder on my desk with a theatrical thud. Budget proposals for next fiscal. Need them reviewed and revised by Friday. I opened the folder, quickly scanning the top sheet. The library's proposed budget had clearly already been slashed, with core services like database subscriptions and student worker hours reduced by nearly 20%. The old me would have nodded, accepted the impossible deadline and unfair cuts, then worked nights and weekends to somehow make it work, preserving services through creative accounting and personal sacrifice. The new me took a deep breath and closed the folder deliberately. That's not possible, Richard, I said calmly. His bushy eyebrows shot up. Excuse me? A proper review of these proposals would take at least 2 weeks, I explained, maintaining eye contact despite his deepening frown. And I've just returned from medical leave today. My first priority is reorienting to operational changes and catching up on immediate needs. The budget is an immediate need, he countered, his tone sharpening. The board meets next Monday. I nodded, acknowledging this reality without capitulating to his timeline. Then I suggest we work with last quarter's figures as a baseline and flag the library budget for a more thorough review at the next meeting. That's not how we do things, Helen. It's how we'll need to do things in this instance, I replied evenly. Unless you'd prefer that I submit a hasty analysis that might miss critical service impacts? We engaged in a brief staring contest, his face flushing slightly while I maintained a composed expression that revealed none of my internal anxiety. Finally, he huffed an exasperated sigh. Fine. You have until Wednesday of next week. But I expect a comprehensive analysis and justification for any proposed restorations to the cuts. You'll have it, I promised, neither gloating in my small victory nor apologizing for asserting reasonable boundaries. After he left, I sat back in my chair, heart racing but mind clear. 6 months ago, I would have taken on the impossible deadline, sacrificing my health and well-being to meet unreasonable expectations. Today, I had chosen differently, not with anger or defiance, but with a simple assertion of reality and respect for my own limitations. It felt momentous and mundane all at once, this small act of professional self-advocacy. By the time I arrived home that evening, I was physically exhausted, but mentally invigorated. The day had been full of small victories, not just with Dean Harrington, but in a dozen tiny interactions where I had spoken my truth clearly, set limits appropriately, and advocated for my needs without apology. I was halfway through preparing a simple dinner when my phone rang. Elise's name flashed on the screen, and I felt the familiar tug of complex emotions that now accompanied any interaction with my daughter. Our relationship had improved dramatically since her financial crisis and subsequent apology, but there remained a certain tentativeness between us, as if neither was quite sure of the new rules of engagement. "Hi, sweetheart," I answered, tucking the phone between my ear and shoulder as I continued chopping vegetables. "Hey, Mom." Her voice sounded strained. "How was your first day back?" "Better than expected," I replied, noting the tension in her tone but waiting for her to elaborate in her own time. "Tiring, but good to be back in my routine." "That's great." A pause, then. "Listen, I was wondering if I could stop by tonight. There's something I need to talk to you about." My knife stilled on the cutting board. "Of course. Is everything okay?" "Nothing bad," she assured me quickly. "Just complicated. And I could use your perspective." An hour later, Elise sat at my kitchen island, pushing pasta around. Her plate without much enthusiasm while I waited patiently for her to broach whatever topic had brought her to my door looking so troubled. "I've been offered a job," she finally said, setting her fork down with a soft clink. "A really good one, partner track at Westbrook and Hayes." "Elise, that's wonderful," I exclaimed, genuinely pleased for her. Westbrook and Hayes was one of the most prestigious firms in the city, known for their social justice work as well as their corporate practice. "Why don't you seem happier about it?" She sighed, running a hand through her hair in a gesture so like her brother's that it made me smile despite the seriousness of the moment. "Because it's in Portland, Oregon, not Maine." "Ah." I sat back, understanding the dilemma immediately. "That's quite a move." 3,000 miles, she confirmed, looking miserable. "Away from everything I know, everyone." I considered my response carefully, mindful of our newly recalibrated relationship. "Do you want the job itself, setting aside the location?" "Yes," she admitted without hesitation. "It's exactly the kind of work I want to be doing, with people I respect enormously. The compensation is excellent, and the firm has a reputation for actual work-life balance, not just talking about it." "So what's holding you back, besides the distance?" She met my eyes directly. "You," she said simply. "After everything that happened this year, the cancer, our reconnection, the thought of being so far away when you might need me again." She trailed off, swallowing hard. A rush of tenderness washed through me, tempered with the wisdom of hard-won perspective. "Elise," I said gently, "making career decisions based on my health isn't a sound strategy, for either of us." "But what if something happens? What if the cancer comes back?" The fear in her voice was palpable, childlike in its rawness. "Then we'll deal with it," I assured her. "Together, whether you're across town or across the country." "It wouldn't be the same. I couldn't just stop by or drive you to appointments or—" "No," I agreed, cutting off her spiraling anxiety. "It would be different, but different doesn't mean worse." She looked skeptical, and I searched for a way to help her understand my perspective without dismissing her concerns. "When your father left," I began, choosing my words with care, "I was terrified about raising you both alone, about how we'd manage financially, emotionally, practically. Everything seemed impossible." Elise nodded, familiar with this part of our family history but clearly unsure where I was going with it. "But that impossible situation forced me to discover strengths I never knew I had," I continued. "It forced both of you to develop independence and resilience earlier than your peers. It wasn't the path I would have chosen, but looking back, I can see how it shaped all of us in ways that ultimately proved valuable." "So you're saying me moving across the country would be good for us?" She sounded doubtful. "I'm saying that change creates opportunity, even when it's challenging. Your moving would mean we'd have to be more intentional about staying connected. We'd have to plan visits, have regular calls, be present for each other in new ways. I reached across the island to cover her hand with mine. And you'd have the career opportunity you deserve without compromising it for fear of what might happen. I don't want you to think I'm abandoning you, she whispered, voicing the real concern that underlay her hesitation. I wouldn't think that, I assured her. There's a world of difference between moving for a wonderful professional opportunity and not showing up when someone needs you in a crisis. She winced slightly at the reference to her absence after my surgery, but nodded in acknowledgement. Besides, I added with a small smile, I've always wanted to visit Portland. I hear the rose gardens are spectacular. A tentative smile curved her lips. They are. I looked them up when I was researching the city. Then it's settled. You'll take the job and I'll plan a visit once you're settled. We'll tour the gardens and you can show me all the hipster coffee shops I've heard so much about. Just like that? She seemed almost disappointed at how easily I'd cut through her dilemma. Just like that, I confirmed. Part of respecting you as an adult is supporting your independence, Elise, even when it takes you far from me. She studied me for a long moment, then shook her head in wonder. You really have changed, Mom. The old you would have been devastated at the thought of me moving so far away. The old me was afraid of a lot of things, I acknowledged, including being alone. But this past year has taught me that I'm pretty, good company for myself, and that true connection isn't dependent on physical proximity. Later that evening, after Elise had left with a noticeably lighter step and promises to keep me updated on the job negotiations, I sat on my patio, watching the sunset and reflecting on our conversation. There had been a time, not so long ago, when my children's choices felt like personal referendums on my worth, their successes a validation of my parenting, their struggles or distances a reflection of my failures. Now I could see more clearly. Elise's potential move was about her life, her path, her growth. My role was to support that journey, not to center myself in her narrative or make her decisions about my needs. It was the same perspective shift that had allowed me to stand up to Dean Harrington earlier that day, the recognition that other people's expectations or reactions were their responsibility, not mine. That I could act from my own center of integrity without taking on the emotional burdens that rightfully belonged to others. The phone rang, interrupting my reflections. An unfamiliar number with a local area code. Hello? Ms. Lawrence? This is Amanda from Dr. Patel's office. I'm calling to remind you about your 3-month follow-up scan scheduled for Thursday at 2 p.m. A cold trickle of anxiety ran down my spine at the reminder. 3 months since completing radiation. Time for the first check to confirm the cancer remained at bay. Yes, thank you. I'll be there. After hanging up, I sat very still, breathing, through the familiar fear that any cancer survivor knows, the dread that lives in the shadows, emerging at checkups and midnight worries to whisper about recurrence and mortality. In the past, I might have kept this appointment to myself, handling the anxiety alone rather than burdening my children or friends with my fears. But the lessons of the past year had been too hard won to abandon now. I picked up my phone and created a group text to Trevor, Elise, and Diane. Follow-up scan this Thursday at 2 hour. Could use some company in the waiting room if anyone's available. The responses came quickly. I'll be there. Diane. Taking the afternoon off. I'll pick you up. Trevor. FaceTime me when you're waiting? I have a deposition but can step out if you need to talk. Elise. Simple, straightforward offers of support. No need to cajole or convince them of the importance of their presence. No need to downplay my anxiety or pretend I was fine handling it alone. This, I realized, was what healthy interdependence looked like. The ability to ask clearly for what I needed, and the trust that those who loved me would respond if they could. Not perfectly, not without limitations or conflicts, but with genuine care and respect for my personhood. The journey from that devastating day in the hospital parking lot to this moment had been nonlinear, marked by setbacks and slow, incremental progress. There had been painful conversations and difficult boundaries to establish, tears on both sides. Moments of doubt when it would have been easier to slip back into familiar patterns rather than forge this new path. But sitting there in the gathering, twilight, watching fireflies begin their evening dance in my small garden, I felt a profound gratitude for the wisdom that suffering had brought me. Not that I would have chosen cancer, never that, but having faced it, I could appreciate how it had illuminated the weaknesses in my most important relationships and given me the courage to address them. My phone buzzed again. A text from Mr. Peterson. "Checking on you. Need anything from the market tomorrow? Making a run?" I smiled, typing back. "I'm good, but thanks for thinking of me. Stop by for coffee this weekend?" His reply came seconds later. "Saturday, 10 a.m. I'll bring those almond cookies you like." This, too, was new. A friendship built on mutual care rather than one-sided giving. Mr. Peterson had been my rock during the worst days of treatment, but he had also allowed me to support him through his own health challenges, creating a balanced exchange that honored both our needs. Thursday arrived with unseasonable warmth, the September air feeling more like July as Trevor drove me to the imaging center. He had insisted on taking the entire day off, arranging for Melissa's mother to handle school pickup for the kids. "You don't have to wait with me the whole time," I told him as we pulled into the parking lot. "The scan itself takes at least an hour." "I know," he replied simply, turning off the engine. I brought a book. The waiting room was crowded with the particular quiet tension unique to cancer centers, patients and families suspended in that liminal space between fear and hope, each face a map of private battles. Trevor settled beside me, calm and present as the minutes ticked by. When my name was called, he squeezed my hand once, then opened his book without unnecessary words of reassurance or concern. Just before entering the scanning area, I turned. "Bert!" He looked up, eyebrows raised in question. "Thank you," I said softly, "for being here, for getting it right this time." His eyes, so like his father's in shape but with my hazel coloring, held mine steadily. "Every time from now on, Mom, I promise." The scan itself was uneventful, the familiar confined space, the mechanical whirring, the technician's disembodied voice asking me to hold still. I focused on my breathing, on the visualization techniques my radiation oncologist had taught me, on the knowledge that whatever the images revealed, I would face it with a support system I could truly rely on. Afterward, Trevor and I stopped for a late lunch at a bistro near the hospital, neither of us mentioning the results that wouldn't come until the next day at earliest. Instead, we talked about Emma's upcoming school play, about the home renovation project he and Melissa were considering, about my plans to rejoin the community garden now that my energy was returning. Normal conversation. Everyday life continuing in the shadow of uncertainty. As we were finishing our meal, Trevor's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, then excused himself to take the call outside. Through the window, I could see him pacing, slightly, his expression serious. When he returned, there was a carefully neutral look on his face that immediately put me on alert. "Everything okay?" I asked, setting down my water glass. He hesitated, then sighed. That was Dad, my ex-husband. And I maintained a cordial but distant relationship, connecting only when necessary regarding the children or grandchildren. His call to Trevor in the middle of a workday was unusual. "He's having some financial troubles," Trevor continued, clearly uncomfortable. "His business isn't doing well and he's behind on his mortgage." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said cautiously, unsure where this was heading. Trevor fidgeted with his napkin. He asked if I could loan him some money, a significant amount. "And?" I prompted when he fell silent. And I told him I'd think about it. He met my eyes directly. What I really wanted to say was that it was pretty rich of him to ask for financial help when he's been minimally involved in our lives for years. That his emergency doesn't constitute my emergency, that maybe he should have planned better. I couldn't help but smile at hearing my own recent life lessons echoed back to me. That sounds familiar. I learned from the best, he acknowledged with a rueful grin. But seriously, Mom, what would you do? He is still my father. I considered the question carefully, honored by his trust in seeking my perspective. I think you establish what you can comfortably offer, if anything, without compromising your own family's security, and you make that offer with clear terms and boundaries. Just like you did with Elise. Similar, yes, though the relationships are different. Your father chose to leave our family, creating distance that has consequences even decades later. That context matters when considering obligations. Trevor nodded slowly. I'll need to talk with Melissa. It would impact our renovation plans. Of course, I agreed. Financial decisions affect the whole household. As we drove home, I found myself reflecting on the strange symmetry of the situation, how the lessons I'd learned through cancer and abandonment were now informing my son's approach to his own boundaries, how wisdom, once gained, rippled outward in unexpected ways. The next morning, I was weeding my small front garden when Dr. Patel's office called. Ms. Lawrence, I have good news. Your scan came back clear. No evidence of disease at this time. The relief that flooded through me was so intense that I had to sit right there in the dirt, my gardening gloves covered in soil, tears streaming down my face. Thank you, I managed. That's wonderful news. Dr. Patel would like to see you for a follow-up next week to discuss ongoing monitoring, but he's very pleased with these results. After hanging up, I remained seated among my marigolds and zinnias, letting the news settle into my bones. No evidence of disease. 3 words that cancer patients dream of hearing, that open the door to futures previously held in suspension. My first instinct was to call the children, to share this precious relief with them immediately, but something made me pause, made me sit with the news alone for a moment first, honoring my own reaction before filtering it through others' responses. 3 months ago, in my hospital room after surgery, the surgeon had asked about my support system at home. Not really, I had admitted then. My children have busy lives. Now, my phone filled with text messages checking on results. My home filled with evidence of loving presence. Trevor's book accidentally left on my coffee table. Elise's half-empty tea mug in my sink from her visit earlier that week. Diane's potted orchid brightening my kitchen windowsill. Mr. Peterson's almond cookies waiting for our Saturday coffee. My support system had transformed because I had transformed. Because I had finally recognized that interdependence required mutuality. That true connection demanded reciprocity. That love without boundaries wasn't love at all, but its shadow. I picked up my phone and created a group text to my inner circle. Scan is clear, no evidence of disease, celebrating with takeout and movie night at my place tomorrow if anyone can join. As the responses poured in, enthusiastic acceptances, offers to bring dessert or drinks, expressions of joy and relief, I felt a profound sense of rightness settle over me. This hard-won wisdom, that I mattered, that my needs deserved recognition, that healthy relationships required balance, would serve me for whatever lay ahead, whether more health challenges or simply the everyday negotiation of being human, among humans who sometimes faltered, sometimes soared, but remained imperfectly precious in their attempts to love well. Cancer had nearly taken my life, but in a strange alchemy, it had given me something just as valuable, the courage to truly live it on my own terms, surrounded by people who saw me, not just what I could do for them. As I rose from my garden and brushed the dirt from my knees, I looked toward the horizon with clear eyes, ready for whatever came next. The 6-month milestone after my final radiation treatment arrived with little fanfare but significant meaning. Half a year of healing, of rebuilding, of learning to navigate the world as this new version of myself. My oncologist had been pleased with my progress, moving my checkups to every 4 months rather than every 3. A small victory in the ongoing battle to reclaim my life from cancer's shadow. "You're doing remarkably well," Dr. Patel had said during my last appointment, reviewing my latest blood work with satisfaction. Physically and, if I may say, emotionally. Many patients struggle more with the aftermath than the treatment itself. "I had good teachers," I'd replied, thinking not of medical professionals but of my own children, whose absence during my greatest need had ultimately taught me the most profound lessons about self-worth and boundaries. On this crisp February morning, exactly 6 months since completing radiation, I stood on the front porch of my ex-husband's apartment building, a padded envelope in my gloved hands and uncertainty in my heart. I hadn't planned to mark the occasion this way, but Trevor's phone call the previous evening had changed that. "Dad's being evicted," he'd said without preamble. "The business finally went under completely, and he's 3 months behind on rent. They've given him until the end of the week." "Where will he go?" I'd asked, surprised by the genuine concern I felt for the man who had walked out on our marriage so many years ago. "That's the thing," Trevor had hesitated. "He asked if he could stay with me and Melissa for a while, just until he figures things out. But with the kids and the limited space. And honestly, Mom, our relationship is still pretty strained. We've only recently started talking regularly again." I'd understood the unspoken question beneath his words. My son was torn between familial obligation and the healthy boundaries he'd been working so hard to establish with his father. "What did you tell him?" I'd asked. "That I needed to talk to Melissa and think about it. But the truth is, I don't think it's a good idea for any of us." The guilt in his voice had been palpable. "Does that make me a terrible son?" "No," I'd assured him. "It makes you a man who understands that helping others shouldn't come at the expense of your own family's well-being." Now, standing before the weathered apartment building where my ex-husband had landed after his business began failing, I questioned my own decision to come here. We'd had minimal contact over the years, connected only through our children and grandchildren at holidays and birthdays. What was I hoping to accomplish? Before I could answer my own question, the security door opened, and there stood Robert, older, grayer. The confident posture I remembered now stooped with what looked like defeat. His eyes widened in genuine shock. "Helen? What are you doing here?" I held up the envelope. "Trevor told me about your situation. I brought you something." He glanced around the shabby lobby, embarrassment evident in his tense shoulders. "You'd better come up. It's a mess, though. I've started packing." The apartment was indeed a mess, but not from packing. It was the kind of disorder that spoke of depression and surrender. Mail piled unopened on counters, unwashed dishes in the sink, clothing draped over furniture. The space itself was small, but could have been pleasant with proper care. "Coffee?" he offered, hastily clearing takeout containers from the small dining table. "No, thank you. I can't stay long." I remained standing, maintaining both physical and emotional distance. Robert nodded, resignation in the gesture. "So Trevor told you everything, I guess. About the eviction, about me asking to stay with them." "He did." "And you've come to tell me what a disappointment I am? How I've failed at everything?" "Because believe me, Helen, I'm already well aware." Bitterness tinged his words, a familiar defensiveness emerging. I studied the man before me, once my husband, once the center of my world, now a stranger carrying the weight of his choices. In his face, I could see echoes of our children, reminders of a shared past that couldn't be erased despite the pain that followed. "Actually," I said quietly, "I came to give you this." I handed him the envelope. He took it warily, as if it might contain legal papers or some other unwelcome surprise. When he opened it and saw the cashier's check inside, his expression shifted from wariness to disbelief. $3,000? He looked up, confusion plain on his face. "I don't understand." "It's for a fresh start," I explained. "First, and last month's rent on a decent place, plus a little extra to get you through until you find work." "But why?" The question held genuine bewilderment. "After everything." I took a deep breath, organizing my thoughts. What I was about to say mattered, not just for Robert, but for my own continuing journey toward wholeness. Because 30 years ago, when you walked out, I was left to rebuild my life from scratch while raising 2 children alone. I know what it feels like to face that kind of fear and uncertainty. He flinched at the reminder but didn't interrupt. "And because our children shouldn't have to shoulder the burden of your choices, just as they've had to learn they can't dismiss mine." I gestured to the check he still held. "This isn't forgiveness or absolution. It's not even reconciliation. It's simply one human being helping another through a difficult time with clear boundaries." "What boundaries?" he asked carefully. "The check comes with conditions. First, you find your own place, not with Trevor or Elise. Their homes need to remain their sanctuaries, not extensions of your safety net. Second, you seek professional help for what is clearly depression. And third, you make a concrete plan for financial stability that doesn't involve liquidating what little retirement savings you have left." He stared at the check for a long moment, then slowly sank onto the couch, the paper trembling slightly in his hands. "I don't deserve this." "This isn't about deserving," I said, echoing the words I'd spoken to Elise months earlier. "It's about breaking cycles and creating healthier patterns for all of us." "Why now?" he asked, looking up with reddened eyes. "After all this time?" I considered the question, searching for the truest answer. Because cancer taught me that. Life is too short for unresolved bitterness. Because our children deserve to see that compassion can coexist with boundaries. And because I'm finally strong enough to help you without losing myself in the process. Robert nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his expression. "When you were sick, Trevor mentioned they weren't there for you at first." "They weren't," I confirmed. "It was a painful but necessary awakening for all of us." "I'm sorry," he said, the words carrying the weight of multiple meanings. "For not being there either, for leaving in the first place." "I know." I moved toward the door, our business concluded. "The past is written, Robert. What matters now is what we do next." As I drove home from Robert's apartment, I marveled at the strange turns life took. How I had gone from being abandoned by this man to offering him help, from being neglected by my children during my greatest need to building a new relationship foundation with them, from being a woman who defined herself through others' needs to someone who stood firmly in her own worth. The money I'd given Robert wasn't an insignificant sum, but it represented something I could afford financially and emotionally. A clean, decisive action that would help not just him, but our entire family system, freeing our children from impossible choices and allowing appropriate distance for all of us. When I arrived home, a text from Elise was waiting on my phone. "Portland apartment secured. Move date set for March 15th. Can you come help me pack next weekend?" I smiled, remembering how fearful she'd been about this move and what it might mean for our relationship. How far we'd both come from that night when she'd asked for $4,000 and I'd said no. My first real act of boundary setting that had ultimately strengthened rather than damaged our connection. "Absolutely," I texted back. "Looking forward to it." Later that evening, Trevor called. His voice was tight with emotion when I answered. "Dad just called me," he said without greeting. "He told me what you did. The money, the conditions, all of it." "I hope you're not upset," I replied, suddenly unsure if I'd overstepped. "I wasn't trying to solve the problem for you." "Upset?" he interrupted. "Mom, I'm in awe. You gave him exactly what he needed without enabling destructive patterns. You were firm, but kind. It was masterful. The admiration in his voice warmed me, but also reminded me how recently I would have been incapable of such clarity. "I've had good practice lately," I said lightly. "Well, I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about not being a terrible son for setting boundaries, and watching how you handled this with Dad. It helped." I called him back and told him I could help him find a place and even contribute some money toward it, but that staying with us wasn't an option. How did he take it? "Better than I expected," Trevor admitted. He actually seemed relieved that there was a plan that didn't involve imposing on family. He mentioned something about breaking cycles. "Good," I said simply. "That's progress." After we hung up, I sat on my patio despite the February chill, wrapped in a thick blanket and sipping tea from the mug Elise had given me for Christmas, engraved with "Strongest Woman I Know" in her elegant script. The night sky stretched above me, stars piercing the darkness with ancient light. Some of those stars had died eons ago, their light only reaching us now, an astronomical reminder that endings and beginnings often existed simultaneously, that transformation was rarely sudden, but rather the accumulated effect of changes set in motion long before they became visible. My phone buzzed with a text from Diane. "Thinking of you on your 6-month milestone. So proud of the woman you've become. Lunch tomorrow?" 6 months since my final treatment. A year since the diagnosis that had altered everything. 15 years. Since Robert walked out. Time collapsed and expanded, each moment both fleeting and eternal in its impact. The following weekend found me in Elise's apartment, surrounded by moving boxes and bubble wrap as we carefully packed her belongings for the cross-country journey. The atmosphere was bittersweet. Excitement for her new opportunity mingled with the poignancy of geographic separation. "I can't believe how much stuff I've accumulated," she sighed, surveying the chaotic living room. "Maybe I should just donate most of it and start fresh." "There's something to be said for traveling light," I agreed, carefully wrapping a framed photo of the two of us from her law school graduation. "But some things are worth bringing along." She paused in her packing, watching me secure the frame and bubble wrap. "You know what still amazes me? How you've never once tried to make me feel guilty about moving so far away. Not even subtly." I looked up, surprised. "Why would I? This is an incredible opportunity for you. Because that's what parents do, isn't it? They talk about missing grandchildren they don't have yet, or remind you how hard holidays will be, or mention how they're not getting any younger." She sat on the edge of her couch, considering me with curious eyes. "At least that's what my friends' parents do. That's what the old you might have done." "The old me was afraid of being forgotten or replaced," I acknowledged, setting the wrapped frame carefully in a box. "The old me believed I had to create guilt or obligation to ensure continued connection." "And the new you?" I smiled, reaching for another photo to wrap. "The new me understands that loving someone means wanting their growth even when it takes them away from you. That genuine connection can't be sustained through guilt or manipulation. That your journey is yours to shape, not an extension of mine." She was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "I used to think your selflessness was your defining quality. How you always put everyone else first. But now I see that your real strength is in knowing your own value, not in relation to what you do for others, but simply in who you are." The observation struck me with its insight. Yes, that was exactly the transformation I'd undergone, from deriving worth through service to others, to recognizing my intrinsic value as a human being worthy of respect and care. "That might be the nicest thing you've ever said to me," I told her, not hiding the emotion in my voice. She grinned, lightening the moment. "Don't get used to it. I have a reputation for being tough to maintain." We worked together through the afternoon, wrapping, boxing, labeling, pausing occasionally, to laugh over rediscovered mementos or debate whether certain items were worth the cost of shipping across the country. By evening, we'd made significant progress. the apartment taking on the transient quality of a space being prepared for farewell. Over takeout eaten amid the boxes, Elise brought up Robert's situation. "Trevor told me what you did for Dad," she said, twirling lo mein on her fork. "That was incredibly generous considering everything." I shrugged. It felt like the right thing to do, for everyone involved. Still, it couldn't have been easy, facing him like that. Being the one to offer help after he abandoned you. It wasn't about ease, I corrected gently. It was about breaking unhealthy patterns that have affected all of us for years. Elise nodded thoughtfully. "Like when I asked you for money during my firm crisis, and you said no to the full amount." Exactly. These moments, they're opportunities to establish new ways of relating to each other, to show through actions, not just words, how we want to be treated and what we're willing to accept. "I've been thinking about that a lot lately," she admitted. "About how I'll establish my own patterns in Portland. New job, new city, clean slate." "What patterns do you want to create?" I asked, genuinely curious. She considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Professionally, I want to maintain boundaries between work and personal life from the beginning. No checking emails at midnight, no sacrificing weekends unless it's truly urgent." "That sounds healthy. And personally—" She hesitated, then met my eyes directly. "I want relationships based on mutual respect and balanced giving, like what we're building now. No more taking people for granted or assuming they'll always be there regardless of how I treat them." Pride and love swelled in my chest. Not the possessive pride of a parent claiming credit for a child's insights, but the deep appreciation of witnessing another human's growth. "That's a worthy aspiration," I said softly. "And one I share." Later that night, driving home from Elise's apartment, I reflected on the different ways my relationships had transformed over the past year. With Trevor, a new honesty that allowed him to see me as a complete person with strengths and vulnerabilities. With Elise, a mutual respect that balanced independence with genuine connection. With Diane, a sisterhood freed from old resentments and competition. Even with Robert, a clear-eyed compassion that required neither reconciliation nor continued bitterness. None of these relationships was perfect. All would require ongoing attention and care, occasional course corrections, the humility to acknowledge when old patterns threatened to reassert themselves. But the foundation had shifted from sand to solid ground, from unconscious expectation to conscious choice. As spring blossomed around me, bringing renewal to the natural world, I felt a parallel renewal within my spirit. My body continued to heal, energy returning in greater measure each week. My work at the library had taken on new dimensions as I advocated more effectively for resources and established healthier professional boundaries. My friendships had deepened, particularly with Margie and Mr. Peterson, each relationship now characterized by mutuality rather than one-sided giving. On a warm April evening, exactly 1 year after my cancer diagnosis, I hosted a small gathering in my backyard, not to commemorate the illness, but to celebrate the life that had emerged from its crucible. Trevor and his family, Diane and her husband, several colleagues and friends gathered around tables decorated with fresh flowers from my garden, sharing a meal I had prepared with joy rather than obligation. Robert had been invited as well, though I'd been uncertain if he would come. He arrived last, bearing a bouquet of tulips and a hesitant smile. In the 2 months since I'd given him the check, he had found a modest apartment, begun therapy, and secured part-time work at a local hardware store, small steps toward rebuilding his life with dignity. As twilight descended and conversation flowed around me, I took a moment to simply observe the scene. These people who constituted my chosen family, each relationship now grounded in authentic connection rather than habit or expectation. There had been a time when I would have bustled about ensuring everyone's needs were met, my own enjoyment secondary to their comfort. Now I sat present in the moment, participating fully rather than facilitating from the margins. Elise called, from Portland during dessert, her face appearing on my tablet screen as we passed it around the table, each person offering greetings and updates. When the device reached me, I moved to a quieter corner of the yard for a more private conversation. "How's the new job?" I asked, taking in her radiant expression. "Challenging but exhilarating," she replied, "and the apartment has started to feel like home. I've even made a few friends in the building." "I'm glad," I said sincerely. "You seem happy." "I am." She paused, then added more softly, "I miss you, though. Not out of obligation or guilt. I just genuinely miss your presence in my life." The distinction she made between missing born of obligation versus genuine feeling touched me deeply. "I miss you too, but I'm also so proud of you for taking this leap." Her smile held both affection and a new maturity. "I booked your flight today, for your visit next month. First-class ticket, my treat, non-negotiable." A year ago, I might have protested, might have insisted that she save her money, or that I could manage fine in economy. Now I simply accepted the gift with grace. "Thank you. I'm looking forward to it." After everyone had gone home and I was clearing the last of the dishes, my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number, and I answered with mild curiosity. "Hello? Is this Helen Lawrence?" A woman's voice, professional but warm. "Yes, it is." "Ms. Lawrence, my name is Jeanette Wilson. I'm calling from Riverside Community College. Your name has been suggested for our Board of Trustees position representing community stakeholders." I set down the plate I'd been rinsing, taken aback by the unexpected call. "I'm flattered, but I'm not sure I understand. I'm just a librarian at the college, not an administrator." "That's precisely why your name came up," Jeanette explained. "We're looking for someone with direct service experience who understands the real challenges facing our students and staff. Dean Harrington specifically mentioned your recent work on the budget committee, saying you showed, and I quote, uncommon clarity and courage in advocating for essential services." A smile tugged at my lips, remembering my confrontation with the dean on my first day back from medical leave. How that small act of boundary setting had apparently registered as leadership rather than defiance. "Would you be willing to consider the position?" Jeanette asked when I remained silent. "It's a 3-year term, with monthly meetings and some committee work." A year ago, my immediate instinct would have been to decline, to insist I wasn't qualified or didn't have the time, putting myself last out of habit rather than genuine consideration. Now I gave the question the thought it deserved. "I'd like to learn more," I said finally. "Could we meet to discuss the specifics?" After arranging a meeting for the following week, I stepped out onto my patio, gazing up at the night sky with a sense of wonder at life's unexpected turns. From a woman sobbing alone in a hospital parking lot to someone whose strength and clarity merited an invitation to help shape institutional policy, the journey had been neither straightforward nor easy but profoundly transformative. The stars above seemed to shimmer with possibility, each one a reminder that light persists even through the darkest nights. That sometimes what appears to be an ending, a diagnosis, an abandonment, a painful recognition of relationship dysfunction, is actually the beginning of something new and unexpectedly beautiful. In that moment of quiet reflection, I made a promise to myself to continue honoring both my strength and my vulnerability, to maintain the boundaries that protected my well-being, while remaining open to genuine connection, to remember always that my value existed independent of what I could do for others. The woman who had driven home alone from cancer surgery 1 year ago would never have believed the life that awaited her on the other side of that trauma. Not just physical healing, but a profound reclamation of self, a rebuilding of relationships, on foundations of mutual respect rather than one-sided sacrifice. As I turned to go inside, a sense of deep peace settled over me. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, and life would surely bring more, I would face them as this new version of myself. A woman who had learned through the crucible of illness and abandonment that being needed is not the same as being loved, that helping others requires honoring oneself first, and that sometimes the greatest act of courage is simply to say, "This is what I need." The journey wasn't over. In many ways, it had just begun. But now I walked it with clear eyes and a full heart, no longer defined by what I gave to others but by the truth of who I was, complete, worthy, and finally fully seen. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.